I'll do that again. Hi, everyone. I'm Josh, Chair of the Young Greens Democracy and Accountability Committee this year. Thanks for attending our elections Q&A for the 2023 internal elections. Nominations opened last weekend and are open until June the 24th at 5 o'clock. So you've still got a few weeks to decide whether you're not going to stand and then submit your nominations. This won't be a super long session. We're just going to run through the election process, which different roles are available, and then there's time at the end for any questions. And we've got representatives from various different committees today who are going to talk about their experiences this year and hopefully convince you that you should also be standing. We've put our safe spaces guidance in the chat. You can access that. It's a Google Doc. And if you have any questions at any time, any problems you think in terms of accessibility or inclusivity, for example, then please get in contact. Jane B is our safeguarding contact today. So you can message her in the chat. And the session is being recorded, although it should only be recording the presentation and my face when I'm speaking. Right, so this is the order we're going to go in today. Just a quick run through of the Young Greens structure if you're not aware of them already. We've got various committees. The next slide is quite a daunting diagram, but it's quite nice. We'll then go through each of the committees one by one and hear from one of the members at least about what they do, what different roles are available, and why you should get involved. I'll then take you to our democracy platform, which is where we run our elections, and Young Greens Convention. So there's all the information you need to know about submitting a nomination and also submitting policies if you're interested in doing that as well. Although there is another separate session we'll do in a couple of weeks, more focused on policy. This is more about the elections tonight. And then at the end, if people have questions about specific roles or the process in general, then you can ask them as well. Right. So this is a breakdown of what the Young Greens looks like at the moment. The main committee is the executive committee, which you can see in the middle. We've got at the moment about 20 members, 20 roles at least. So it's a big group. It expanded a couple of years ago. And then the Democracy and Accountability Committee, which sits alongside it, is basically checking the executive committee to make sure they're not breaking any rules and also running these kind of events, running the internal democracy. On the left-hand side, you can see the regional and local groups, which some of you will already be involved with at university or in different towns and cities. The executive committee is also involved in supporting those groups as well. On the right-hand side, we've got liberation and special interest groups. We're going to hear more about them later and how you can nominate yourselves if you want to do that as well. And then finally, also the Green Students Committee, which is a bit of a subsection of the exec, I guess, but we can explain more in a bit. These are all the roles available for election this year. We'll break it down a bit more as we go on. But as you can see, there's quite a lot. I'm not going to go through them all right now because role descriptions are all available on the democracy platform, which I'll show you in a bit. But as you can see, hopefully, it's quite a wide range. There are a couple of new roles this year, membership and diversity and political education, which are not roles which have existed in their current format before this year. So that's quite exciting. Green Students co-conveners, there are two of them, and they are also involved in chairing the Green Students Committee, which you saw on the previous slide. Then the other roles on the right-hand side are our liberation roles, which are also connected to the liberation groups, and we'll explain that as well. So we can start with the Executive Committee, and Jane, if you'd be happy to unmute. Jane is one of our co-chairs, but you can introduce yourself and in as much or as little detail as you want, just let people know what the exec does, and whilst you're at it, also the Green Students Committee. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Josh. Hi, everyone. As Josh said, I'm Jane. I'm the co-chair of the Young Greens. I usually have pronouns. I'm part of the Green Party. And yeah, I've been doing this role for 2 years. And then before that, I was the Green Students co-convener as well. So I kind of have a bit of experience across both of those committees. But in terms of the executive committee, we are essentially responsible for like running the Young Greens basically. So pretty much like all of the activity that the Young Greens does comes from the executive or is supported by the executive in some way. So everything from our social media presence to running our political education events like 30 Under 30, to running convention, to winter general meeting, to supporting groups, to making sure that we have delegates at international conferences and congresses, to liaising with the main party, all that type of thing, is what kind of the exec does. Obviously, as Josh just talked about, it's broken down into different roles. So there are 20 of them now, I think, which we're now going into the third year of that structure, which is quite exciting. So there's a load of not non-portfolio roles. There used to be non-portfolio roles, a load of portfolio roles that all do different things. So for example, international officer works really closely on our international links. Events officer works on supporting our events like convention or 30 to 30, all that different type of stuff. I'm not going to talk through all of them because we've got all the role descriptions, but I'm happy to ask kind of any questions on them. And then we also have deliberation and special interest group officers as well, who are there to represent deliberation and special interest groups, to provide links with them, to make sure that the Young Greens is including those deliberation and special interest groups in the things that we're doing. And then, as Josh said, we also have the Green Students Committee. So they have 2 co-conveners who are elected. They sit on our executive committee and basically provide the link with that committee. So that committee is kind of more responsible for working on our sort of like student-led presence. So kind of campaigns based around kind of university, college, school students, but also in terms of working with the exec on supporting Young Green university societies, and also on things like Freshers Packs as well that we do every year. The exec also works to support pretty much everything in that diagram that Josh showed you earlier. So we work to support the local and regional groups. We work with the Democracy and Accountability Committee as well to make sure that things like winter general meeting and convention run, and that we have like food at it and a place to hold it, and things like that. And we also work with and support the liberation and special interest groups as well via the liberation officers. Yeah, I think that's pretty much it. That sounds like not a lot, but there's a lot of things going on throughout the year. But if anybody has any more kind of specific questions about specific roles, I'm happy to answer them. Yeah, or standing in elections or writing manifestos and things like that. But yeah, that's what the exec does. We run the Young Greens. It's great fun. You should get involved.
Thanks, Jane. Very detailed, very exciting. Yeah, there's a lot of stuff to get involved with. And we'll move on to our next committee, and we can do, I think, questions at the end unless anybody has something really urgent to ask now. Next committee is the Democracy and Accountability Committee. That I think is a GOAT, or whatever Canva had as the closest equivalent, because it is, in my opinion, the best committee in the Young Greens, though that is up for debate. And Ollie is here and can talk a little bit. They're a member this year. And Ollie, would you like to tell everybody what DAC is all about?
Yeah, so hi everyone, I'm Ollie. I'm on DAC this year. My pronouns are they, them. So the Democracy and Accountability Committee, the clue is kind of in the name. We help with the running of Young Greens democracy and with ensuring that the exec is kept accountable to the membership. So we run plenary sessions at Winter General Meeting and at convention to facilitate our motions, and all of that fun stuff. We hold workshops like this one, Q&A sessions throughout the lead up to our events like Winter General Meeting and convention, to ensure that the membership is kept up to date with what's going on, and they have the information that they need to be able to participate fully within the Young Greens. In terms of accountability, we ensure that the exec doesn't go beyond our ruling documents. So the words are failing me, apologies. Begins with C, someone please help me. Constitution, that's the word. We ensure that they don't go beyond the Constitution in things that they do throughout the year. We also, so as part of the Democracy and Accountability Committee, there is a Complaints and Disputes Subcommittee, which I am the chair of this year. So should any complaints or disputes happen between members of the Young Greens, that structure is in place, and the Democracy and Accountability Committee help to facilitate that procedure. I think that about covers the majority of, we also make rulings on things within our ruling documents. So if the executive committee has a question about whether they have the ability to do something or not, we can kind of consult the Constitution and other documents to kind of make a ruling on whether something is permitted or to clarify things and stuff like that. I think that about covers it, but if there are any other questions, I will happily answer them later on, or if any other member of DAC has something they want to add.
Thanks, Ollie. Yeah, so a lot of different activities throughout the year. As Ollie was indicating, in terms of the workload, it's kind of dependent for a lot of the year on how much chaos the executive committee get up to. It's usually not much, so don't worry about that. Historically, they've had more to do when we've maybe been less organized, but it's been pretty good this year, I have to say. And then the workload builds up a bit as we get further towards convention. So let's move on. Liberation and special interest groups, which have already been mentioned by Jane. I think Finn is here now. Finn, would you be able to unmute and introduce yourself, tell people which committee you're on, and then what liberation and special interest groups do?
Yeah, hello, I'm Finn, they, them, and I am the under 18s officer on the exec, which means I also sit on the under 18s special interest group committee. And I'm also the co-chair of the LGBTIQA Young Greens. So I sit on that liberation group committee as well. So liberation and special interest groups are groups within the Young Greens that represent a certain subset of the Young Greens. So for example, the LGBTIQA Young Greens represents Young Greens who are also LGBTIQA. So a lot of my work on the under 18 Young Greens committee and the LGBTIQA Young Greens committee has been to do with comms. So it's like both those groups have Twitter and Instagram accounts. So we'll be making digital communications for both of those accounts, and also having meetings and talking about issues. And then if, as under 18s officer, I would bring those issues sometimes back to the executive committee, or it's just about making sure that those specific groups in society are represented in the Young Greens as well. And that's the job of the liberation groups and special interest groups to do. And so I think each special interest group and liberation group has 2 co-chairs and an officer on the exec, and a certain amount of like non-portfolio officers who are also on the committee. And that's just to sort of represent that group of people within the Young Greens. Yeah, and the sort of how much those committees are busy depends on what's going on. If there's something specific, like there's more conversations with the LGBTIQA Young Greens during events like Pride Month, where we might help with the Young Greens comms or whatever. So those things, the amount of time that's put into those committees really depends on what's going on. And that's basically it. But if there are any questions about liberation and special interest groups, then I'm happy to answer them.
Great, thanks, Finn. So yeah, next slide has gone the wrong way now, a list of the different roles available within the Liberation and Special Interest Groups. You'll see as well on the democracy platform I show you in a moment that they don't all have the same number of committee members, as been said, because they have a degree of autonomy and the level of engagement differs throughout the year. There are various demands in terms of workload, and so they don't all have a super strict structure. There's some flexibility. But yeah, another good range of roles which you can get involved with, and not too big a workload as well. So hopefully easy enough to schedule them with your other commitments as well. So I will now take you, if this link works, to the democracy platform. This is where we organize our elections and our nominations and everything we've been speaking about. So this is the homepage. If you've not been on this website yet, then the first time you log in, you need to create an account. Once you've logged in once, then that's fine. You don't need to make any other passwords or anything like that. And if somebody could put this link into the chat at some point, that would be great. So you'll see in the homepage, we've got a timetable. We're already partway through this. We're on the second event now, as you can see. Other events to look out for in the run-up to convention are the motion support workshop at the end of June. That's if you're interested in submitting a motion or an amendment and you want some guidance from DAC on how to word it, how to make it constitutionally proper, anything like that, that you can drop in. But more specifically related to the elections, there are deadlines in terms of when nominations are open, and also, just as importantly, when nominations reopen. So if there are any roles which at the time of June 24th, nobody's nominated themselves for, it doesn't mean they're just empty for the rest of the year. We'll reopen nominations up until the day before convention to give people as long as possible to submit a nomination, just to make sure we can have as full as committees as we can throughout the year. And then on 8th of July, still working out the final details in terms of time, but if you're running for the Executive Committee or the Democracy and Accountability Committee, there is a hustings, which we encourage every candidate to go to. We can't force you to, but it's basically an opportunity for you to read out a statement, answer some questions about why you think you'd be a suitable nominee for any particular role. For the Liberation and Special Interest Groups, you don't have to take part in the hustings. We don't do it at the same time because there are so many candidates. It would take too long. And also because, as we've said, they have a degree of autonomy. We'd like them to be able to arrange the hustings if they want to in their own time. And sometimes that happens at convention on one of the mornings when the Liberation groups have their own annual general meeting within convention. So if you're worried about hustings, for example, it's not compulsory, and for some of the roles, it does not exist, formally at least. So I'll go to the elections page at the top. Your screen will look a little different because you won't have the settings and to-do list at the top. But elections page, again, is a more detailed breakdown of the timetable. There's a list of all of the roles, and importantly, as we've been speaking about earlier, role descriptions. These are pretty updated, so everything is very relevant to this year. There are rough estimates in terms of work. It's very variable, of course, as the year goes on. We think they're pretty accurate now that they've been amended. And of course, it varies with the role. So co-chair and treasurer are generally the busiest roles. But then, for example, when we are organizing 30 under 30, the political education officer role will have a much larger workload than they would at other times of the year. Same for DAC. It's usually a fairly low workload through most of the year. And then when it gets to organizing convention, it can stack up a bit for the next couple of months or so. But because there's a committee of 5 members, it's very manageable. There are election rules if you're a candidate. These have been codified for the last year or so. This link should work. We've got them all written out on the website. If you are a candidate, I'd really encourage you to read these before you stand. There's nothing really scary in there. It's just about, for example, if you're campaigning online, needing to put a small imprint on any graphics you do, just to show that you're not actually representing the Young Greens, but you're a candidate. And also, if you're wanting to spend any money in a campaign, then there are some limits on that as well. There is an easy read version, which seems to be working as well. Slowly. Yep, there you go. This is basically a broken down version of the rules, which you can read. It's a little easier to digest than the actual constitutional language, broken down into topics like spending, data use, campaigning in print, etc. Let me go back. So let's pretend that I'm wanting to nominate myself now. So I'll go back to the home page. If you're wanting to submit a nomination, then you go to the button which says submit a nomination, and you'll be taken to a screen which looks like this. You put in your name. So there you go. You've all just seen my phone number now. That's unfortunate. You put which role you're applying for. Let's say elections officer, co-chair, whatever. Optional, you can put a photo up. You don't have to, not everybody does. Local party. Candidate statement can be as long or as short as you want. They're very variable. Again, depends on what role you're running for, but people generally will put if they've had any other experience within the Green Party or the Young Greens, and why they think that would be useful for their candidacy for this role. Although again, I want to stress as much as possible, having prior experience on other committees is not compulsory. Lots of people will have none and then do brilliant jobs. We want as many people to be standing and getting elected as possible. You can, again, optional links to social media. If you want to make a video, that's great. If you want to make a campaign website, I'm not sure I've seen that before, but please go for it. And then supporters, this is a technical thing you need to be aware of before you submit your nomination. You will need 2 other members of the Young Greens to officially support your nomination. If you're running for the exec or for DAC, if you're running for a liberation or special interest group, this is not compulsory, it's not necessary, but for the 2 larger committees it is. And the reason I'm pointing this out is that because DAC will need to reach out to your supporters before the deadline just to check that they are definitely supporters and that you haven't just written down 2 people's names without asking their permission. So that's why it's ideal for you to not submit a nomination, let's say like 15 minutes before the deadline. We can still administer it, but if you want your candidacy to be up and live as soon as nominations close, then ideally we can get this done a couple of days before the deadline, so everything is approved, we've spoken to your supporters, and then everything's ready to go. Jane, you've got a hand up.
Yeah, I just had 2 questions, somewhat for my benefit, but also for other people's. The first one is about job sharing, because none of us have mentioned, and because I always forget, but like all of these roles are available as job shares as well. So can you talk us through how you would nominate yourself if you're nominating yourself as a job share? And then my second question was, I've definitely not forgotten it. Oh, is there a limit on how many people like you as an individual can support in the election? Or is that limit just applying to motions? There's definitely a limit on one of them, and I can never remember which way around it is.
Thanks for the reminder. Yeah, so job shares are available for all of the roles except for co-chair or Green Student co-convener, because you are co-chairing anyway. The nomination process, as far as I can remember, is exactly the same. So name, you would put names instead, like A and B. Role is the same thing. I know job share candidates have put up a joint photo or cropped 2 heads into the same picture together. Local party, you can put them, each of your individual local parties down, and we can administer that. That's fine. The process is exactly the same. You still only need 2 supporters. As far as I'm aware, you are allowed to support a specific number of candidates, and the number is not something I'm going to tell you right now because I can't remember off the top of my head, but I will find out before the end of the session. Yes, the other thing Jane was referring to was nominations. So I may as well take you to that page as well. You'll see on the right-hand side, there's a button called Collecting Motions. This is where people have submitted a motion or an amendment, but before it can get onto the agenda for convention, they need 3 other members to officially support it. And any a motion or amendment which hasn't yet reached that threshold will be on this page. You can click on any of the amendments here, have a read, and if you support it, if you want it to be heard at convention, you can put your name and local party down on there. And then once they've got 3 out of 3, they'll be removed from this page and we'll go onto the main homepage once nomination deadline is closed, and everything will appear live at the bottom of this page. So currently we've just got the constitution and standing orders here. Those are there live already, so you can submit an amendment if you want to. Everything else will appear after June the 24th. But here are the other links as well to submit a motion or amendment of any sort. It's pretty self-explanatory, I think. And I think I'm able to go back to the presentation now. Oh, that's it. Okay. Any questions about elections or motions or anything? I'm going to try and find out about the limits on supporting candidates, because that's a good point. And yes, just to clarify, job shares, you can do that. It's the same process, basically. Don't worry about it. It's really good. If there's a role with a heavier workload, for example, and you're not sure you're going to be able to commit to a full year, if you're working as a job share, then there's a bit more flexibility in terms of attending meetings, dividing work between you, etc. So does anybody have any questions? You can either put them in the chat or put your hand up and speak. And it doesn't have to be anything. Okay, if we are elected, is each exec member trained up on how to do their role? Good question. So there is a official 2-week handover period. Sorry, Jane, yeah, you can answer this question.
Yeah, so the answer is yes. So as Josh started saying, we have an official 2-week handover period. So that's a 2-week period in which the outgoing exec is still there and will still meet and will still do things while the incoming exec gets trained on how to do their roles. So generally we do kind of a couple of different training sessions. So one of them will just be a basic introduction to the Young Greens, how it runs, what it does. There are kind of some more specific sessions around GDPR and safeguarding, because the exec needs to know about those things as well, because they're both very important to what we do. And then we go into kind of more detail on specific role descriptions, on how to use some of the programs that we use, like Action Network. You will also have probably a handover document from your predecessor. So that will be kind of everything written down that they've done that they think is useful for you to know about. And you should also have a meeting with your predecessor as well. So that's basically where they can talk you through your handover, through kind of the role. You can ask any questions as well. So yes, there is training in place. Don't worry. It's all there. And it's quite fun, hopefully. Some of it's fun. The GDPR stuff is a tiny bit boring, but we have to do it. But the rest of it is fun. And that applies for pretty much all of the committees. Some of them are a little bit more kind of ad hoc, but the exec definitely gets one. DAC generally gets invited to most of the exec stuff as well. The Green Students Committee co-conveners are already on that exec anyway. And then the liberation groups, it kind of depends a little bit more on kind of how they're structured and what they've got and things like that. So yes, there is training in place. Don't worry, you don't get thrown in the deep end with it.
Thanks, Jane. Are there any other questions? What's the difference between liberation officers and liberation group co-chairs? Finn, would you like to answer this one?
Could you repeat the question, please?
Yeah, sorry. What's the difference between the liberation officers and the liberation group co-chairs?
So I think the co-chairs is slightly busier role potentially. From my experience, the co-chairs are the people who at the meetings, will run the meetings, they'll chair the meetings, and the officers will contribute ideas. So I think it's generally quite a, it's not loads busier as a co-chair, but it's more about like running meetings, organizing meetings, putting out agendas and things like that. But other than that, it's not that much of a difference.
I'm on mute. 2 hands up. We go to Mina and then Ollie.
Yeah, I just want to add on to that, and I'm only adding on to this because I was a liberation officer a year or so ago, trans liberation officer way. I would describe the role as the liberation officer is in some ways like a liaison officer between the committee here, between that subcommittee, that's young LGBTIQA plus Greens, for instance, if you're the LGBTIQA plus officer, and the exec, and you're sort of like representing that there, because the co-chair of young LGBTIQA plus Greens, that's a lot of letters in that acronym, I can assure you, does not have a seat on the exec. So that's the liberation officer has that sort of like exec position, and sort of like has that sort of representation there. Also in the event, like with the trans young Greens group, for instance, if you do not have an active group there, the liberation officer in many ways is like a de facto co-chair in some respects, and is sort of like the person you would go to as a young Green if you wanted to raise those issues on that specific liberation basis.
Thanks, Mina. I think Finn had their hand up next.
Yeah. Yes, sorry, I was thinking in terms of the work on the liberation committees. Obviously, there is the work with the exec for the officers as well.
And Jane.
Yeah, sorry, I realize we're all just like adding things. But in terms of like the liberation groups that don't necessarily have committees, because the liberation officers and the special interest group officers as well sit on those committees, they can essentially co-opt a committee themselves. So for example, in like Mina's case, they could have co-opted a Trans Young Greens committee if they wanted to, if there was the desire there to do that. You don't have to. You can just be the liberation officer, that's completely fine, but it's kind of up to you. That option is there if you want to do that. It's kind of your choice, but the option is there if you want to do it. It does give you all of the power to decide who's on your committee though. Maybe that's too much power.
So if you are a wannabe dictator, then there's the way in.
It's the Thanos Infinity Gauntlet, you see. That's what the liberation officer role is when it comes to making a committee.
Right. Next question. Is it mandatory to attend convention to stand in the election? No, it's not. So the results will be announced primarily, firstly, at convention on the Sunday afternoon at the end. Although if you're not attending, what we've always done is send you an email as soon as the results have been administered by DAC to let you know whether or not you've been elected. I'd encourage everybody to come virtually if you can't make it in person. Attendance is equal on both ends, whether you're attending live in Bristol this year or on Zoom. But no, you don't have to come. And again, with the hustings, there is another hustings, shorter kind of more Q&A style hustings at convention on the Saturday before voting closes. So if anybody hasn't voted yet, they have the final chance to speak to some of the candidates. You can attend that online as well as in person if you're not there. But no, if you just can't make convention, that's fine. You're still allowed to stand. Please still nominate yourself. Right. Are there any more questions? If they're not, or whilst you're thinking of questions, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and try and find what the Constitution says about nomination limits. In the meantime, would anybody on EC or DAC want to share, let's say, the most enjoyable thing they've done this year in their role? I'll let any of you take that on.
I wasn't going to share an enjoyable thing. There are lots of enjoyable things, but the thing that I was going to say was that if you're interested in a like executive committee role or like a DAC role, and like you want to ask specific questions, like you can also like email the individuals on the exec. Like all of their email addresses, our email addresses even are up on the Young Greens website. And I mean, I'm speaking on behalf of exec members here, but I'm sure that people would be happy to kind of answer questions about their role and things like that. So like, please do feel free to like get in touch if you have like specific questions about like the international officer role. The only ones, obviously there are some roles that are vacant. And then as Josh mentioned, our current equality and diversity officer role is becoming the membership and diversity officer role, and then the political education activist training officer role is becoming the political education officer role. So they're like a tiny bit different, but you can still get in touch with kind of the equivalent role now because it's kind of fairly similar. We just changed the names a little bit and the role descriptors a bit to make it a little bit more kind of logical and share things a little bit more. But yeah. I haven't thought of a fun thing that I've done this year because the only thing that is coming to my head is GPEX, and that's absolutely not fun. So like somebody else please find a fun thing before I start talking about the safeguarding subcommittee. Like that's not fun.
I don't know if it counts as fun, but there was an accountability session this spring, this spring but was just passed, where because there was quite a few exec members who were not attending that night, I had to read out a lot of speeches, a lot of reports even, with a very sore throat. And it was fun. I mean, it was painful but fun. I mean, I was tempted to do accents at one point, but admittedly, we did not get to that stage, thank goodness. So yeah, fun times. Can't wait to do that at convention. It's going to be amazing. It'll be over Zoom probably. Anyway.
I was going to say one of the fun things that I enjoyed was the local election, the action day that I went on. We organised action days across the country for the local elections, and I went to one in Manchester, and it was really good to just sort of meet the candidate and talk to people in Manchester and campaign in the local elections. And then that candidate got elected, which was really fun.
That's a really good one, Finn. I was going to say, I think one of my favorites now I've been thinking about it is like the Friday the 5th or whatever the date was when all of the local election results were being announced. And Kelsey, who's the other co-chair of the Young Greens, and I were on a call when the results for University Ward in Lancaster came in. And we'd been waiting for them like all day, and we weren't sure. Basically, it's like a swing ward, and there was a chance that we could get like 2 Young Greens elected, and like Labour were targeting it quite hard. We got 1 Young Green elected, and it was like a really good split. And I think I like screamed on the phone, which was quite funny. But yeah, and then I think one of my other nice memories from maybe this year, I think it was, is like going to conference with the Young Greens as well. It's always a really lovely atmosphere having like a little group of Young Greens. It's kind of like a gang, but in like a nice way, where like everyone sits together and like talks together and things like that. So yeah, it's really cute. It's good fun. Josh, do we need to keep talking, or have you found your answer?
We can keep talking if you want. As far as I can see, there are no restrictions, although I've noticed maybe some wording which needs to be changed, which is a little confusing, differentiating nominee and supporter. But as far as I can tell right this second, there are not restrictions. So if you want to support everybody standing, whether you know them or not, I'm pretty sure that's allowed. But if I find out that's wrong, I'll email everybody who's here to avoid misleading you. Jane.
Again, this is slightly for my benefit, slightly for everybody else's. If people don't know other Young Greens that can support them and nominate them, can they get in touch with DAC for help on that? Or like what support is provided around that to encourage people who may not know loads of people to get involved?
Yeah, that's a good question. So yeah, if you're struggling, let us know. You can reach out to your local party as well, who should be able to generate a list of Young Greens members in your area. Even if your local party is small, there's a good chance you have more than 2 other members aged under 30. Hopefully, maybe I'm being ambitious. I'm pretty sure I'm right on that in most areas. Mina's got her hand up.
Yeah, I mean, I quite famously remember, I remember very well what Jane told me last year, that my last local party before I changed it had only 1 Young Green, and that was me. So I think the unofficial answer as well would probably be reach out through social media as well. Try and build up those links. I suppose Twitter can be good, is something I have to say, is what I would say, but also other social media platforms are available. But that's an unofficial way, but I'm sure the DAC can help in some small regard in that way. Also the hashtag, yes. Hashtag YGElex23. That's how you say that. Good.
Yeah, thanks, Mina. So just to clarify, email alldac, alldac@younggreens.org.uk if you're already struggling, but reach out to your local party and also use social media if you're already struggling. As a last resort, let's say there's 10 minutes before nominations close. If you're running for a Liberation Officer role, remind you that the Liberation groups and co-chairs do not require supporters. But I understand that's not an acceptable compromise for every role, because that only applies for the Liberation group roles. I think everything's covered that we know about right now. If nobody else has any other questions, then we can wrap up. It's not looking like it. So